computer. So one of the reasons why I forgot to call you yesterday, I was at the my German friends, the Essers, who live here in Stony Brook. They do an annual May Day celebration, and that they usually get it at the end of May. This year, it slipped into a little bit of June, and we put up a maypole. And it was the first time I got to talk to them about their April visit to Vietnam. And they told me when they were there in April, it was well over 100 degrees most of the time they were there. And I remember from I don't know how accurate it was, but the movie Good Morning Vietnam, one of the many ways that the main character got himself in trouble when he gave the weather report, he said, the weather in Vietnam today is hot and shitty and will be hot and shitty tomorrow. So I wonder your reactions to the weather. What was the weather like in Vietnam, as you recall? Say anything you want.
Well, on my first tour to Vietnam, I arrived the first week of January 1968.
Right.
And, I spent most of that year as a company commander in a tank battalion in the Highlands.
Mm-hmm.
And it was hot during the day. I mean, hot, well over 100 degrees. And then in nighttime, because of the altitude that we were at,
Uh-huh.
it got cool. So you had to sort of be ready for both temperatures. When I was in the tank, I didn't have a problem. I carried everything I needed.
The tank
Now,
was the tank air conditioned?
no, 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 no air conditioning in that M48A3. It was a good tank.
Mm-hmm.
The M48 had a gasoline engine, and then they kept modifying it, and the new tanks came out, the M60s. But
Okay.
in Vietnam, we used the M48s, and luckily they took the turret off the new tank and put it on the old tank. So I had a modified M48. It was called an M48A3 diesel engine, and was very, very, very good. Good
Okay.
vehicle.
But as far as your recollection, so it sounds like the Highlands had a distinct weather pattern where you got the cool, cool weather in the evening. But is it the rest of Vietnam? It's generally over 100. Is that just during their summer months, or is that throughout the year?
Well, I'd say it's pretty much during the year.
Right. And when do they get the monsoons?
Well, it all depends where you are.
Uh-huh.
If you're in the Highlands, you started getting monsoons in June, May, June,
Right.
and so they moved our tank battalion out of the Highlands to avoid all the mud and everything,
Right.
and moved us to be a part of another unit, the 173rd, uh, and so we supported them, and another mechanized unit called the First to the 50th Mech.
Right. So
So
I remember in military historian Trumbull Higgins, who spoke years ago at Southampton College, and he was describing the ill-fated invasion of Russia by Hitler.
Hitler,
And he
yeah,
described that General Winter was a formidable adversary. So it sounds like the weather in Vietnam actually affected the deployment of some of the assets we had there.
yeah, that's true.
Mm.
So I served in all over Vietnam, including the second
Right.
assignment. But this is about the first
Yeah, let's
assignment.
let's focus on the first one. We'll do separate, at least one or two separate ones on the second assignment. So the description of hot and shitty is pretty accurate, but it did get cool in the Highlands. And I
It
get
did get cool at night, yes. Now it
yeah,
didn't. Now it didn't get down to 50,
right.
but it got down definitely to the 60s. And from going to 100 and something degrees in the day to 60 degrees at night, that was
Right,
cold.
right. So over the years at various family gatherings that we've had at this house, I've noticed, and maybe it's just I've learned that my perceptions are not always accurate. You seem to be telling more stories about your Vietnam experiences, and a couple of times I heard you talking about your encounters with animals in Vietnam. So, and you could take them. What I'd like you to do, think of some of the animals you encountered and tell the story of each one separately. Maybe just two or three stories about your encounters with animals.
Well, mostly snakes.
Mhm.
Snakes were my biggest concern because, you had this little snake called the bamboo viper that'd be up in a tree, and you'd be putting your hammock up in a tree, and you'd have to make sure you were careful not to disturb that little bamboo viper because he could kill you.
Hmm.
And he wasn't but 8 inches long.
Hmm.
Then you had the pythons, you had the you had the uh, I'm trying to think of what the
Cobra?
other cobras. You had the cobras, uh, and they grew from different sizes. And you had all kinds of non-poisonous snakes uh, uh, that grew to some extent. We had one as a pet. We had two as a pet. One was a small 6-footer, uh, and then we had an 18-footer as a
Huh.
pet. And
Now this is with the Montyards?
no, this is when I was down in the tank battalion.
Hmm.
And
What type
now
of
with
snakes?
that,
What type of snakes were the pets?
uh, they were constrictors. What do they call them?
Boa constrictors?
Boa constrictors, yeah.
Hmm.
And so they weren't poisonous, but you didn't want them to bite you.
Right. And did someone who had the responsibility of feeding them, or they fed themselves?
Well, the first sergeant had two cages out in front of our headquarters, and the small cage held a small cobra, a small boa constrictor, and the large cage held the big one.
Hmm.
And the big one always got to get out during the day because he couldn't get away from you. He was 18 feet long,
Hmm.
so you could track him. That little guy got out, and he could run faster than me almost, and so he didn't get out too much. So they fed him live chickens and ducks and whatever they could
Jeez.
get their hands on.
Hmm. Okay.
And so the other animals that I ran into, there were hundreds of water buffaloes, and they were mostly under the control of some owner that
Hmm.
was working some rice paddies or whatever. And there were elephants that we used uh, also to help move large trees and other things. Um, the thing that bothered me the most were the ground squirrels and the rats.
Hmm.
And the more I got into the villages or the built up areas, the more the rats were there. So
Uh-huh.
uh, we were pretty secure, but those damn rats, they're pretty smart on how to get after our food and whatever. So
Right.
uh, there
You
were
know,
other kinds of uh, an animal that looked like a bobcat, an animal that looked like a mountain, lion, and they were pretty much uh, afraid of you, so you didn't have too much trouble with them.
hmm I remember you telling, I heard a story that you were telling somebody, I think at the last family party that I was at here, about your encounter with an elephant on patrol. Is that
Oh
what you?
no, this was this was one of my most embarrassing situations in both tours.
Uh-huh.
Uh, I flew into Vietnam uh, early one day uh, with a plane full of replacements, and they put us up in these tents until they could figure out where we were going to go. And they woke me up within 10 hours and said, "Get your stuff. You're going on an airplane to Pleiku, and they're going to have a replacement detachment there for the 173rd Airborne." The
Hmm.
173rd Airborne was working up towards Dak To, and this is before Tet.
Hmm.
Tet started, first part of February, if I remember right.
Hmm.
So uh, they flew us into Pleiku, put us on trucks, and when I had been at the jungle school a month before I deployed, I pick up the newspaper one morning and I read how the 173rd lost a battalion of soldiers in one night
Mm.
up in Docto.
Hmm.
And I said to my buddy Jerry Malcolm, who was on orders to go to the first camp, I said, I don't know if I want to go to the 173rd. If they could lose 25% of their men in one night, you know, woe unto me. So when we pulled into Camp Enari, which was outside of Pleiku proper, but that was the home of the 4th Infantry Division, I saw a poster that they had along the fence line, uh, which was the crest of a tank battalion,
Uh-huh.
the Panthers, the 1st Battalion, 69th Armor. So I said to Jerry, let's rip up our orders and just report into that battalion.
Mm.
So that's what we did. We reported into that battalion, and that major that was the XO was very happy to have us because he needed someone to form this new light cav unit, and that was my designation. And my friend got to be the S4 for a while. And that first night, we came under rocket attack. These 122 millimeter rockets that they would fire, and they weren't necessarily aimed at a particular pinpoint target. They were an area target.
Hmm.
And so when the rockets went off, you're supposed to get out of your tent, off your cot, and get down into a bunker.
Hmm.
So that's what I did. I ran down towards the bunker, slipped, and fell right into barbed wire. I had barbed wire cuts all over me. And anyway, next morning, the XO was going to drive me out to where the battalion forward field headquarters was. Now, that battalion had 3 tank companies. It had my little light cav company, and it had a headquarters company.
Hmm.
And I was going to, the light cav unit was going to be formed from the combat assets that were in this big headquarters company.
Hmm.
They had a mortar platoon, they had a scout platoon, they had a ground surveillance platoon, they had a maintenance team. Uh, and they had tanks.
Okay.
Had a
And we're
platoon
getting
of
to the
tanks.
elephant, right?
Yeah, we're getting to the element. So I check in and it's dusk. And I'm brand new to the area. The battalion commander's not there. So I meet the XO and get my orders that, I'm now in charge of the forward area security for that unit that was my unit, lots of other units that were in a fire base.
Hmm.
And so I went around, make sure we had, you know, observers in different foxholes and machine guns, and put the tanks in so they could support each other, but at the same time support most of the 360-degree circle of fire base.
Hmm.
And uh, I was told again by the XO that there had been a lot of activity not too far from where we were, so we needed to be really on our guard.
Hmm.
So I didn't have any particular command posts for my unit set up in there. So I took a cot and put it in the operations center so I could hear what was going on. And in the middle of the night, about 2 o'clock in the morning, we start getting these calls from the tanks. And the tanks were uh, in a fire position inside our wire. But outside the wire was about a 50-foot clearing all the way around the circle. And on the other side of that 50-foot clearing was heavy bamboo. I mean, big bamboo.
Hmm.
And we weren't going to take more of that down for 2 reasons. First of all, the natives didn't like us cutting down the bamboo. And second of all, we weren't going to be there that long.
Hmm.
We kept moving around. So I get this call from one of the tankers, the senior guy, that there's a hell of a lot of movement out there in that bamboo. It's at least a platoon-sized unit that's moving around out there. I said, well, keep monitoring it and see if you can turn on your your infrared sight, M42 sight, and see what you can see. He calls back and says, the only thing I can see is bamboo moving. I said, well, there's not supposed to be anybody out there. And the last thing I want to do is be in charge of a fight, this night, first night here. So fire, each of you tanks fire a couple of shots out there with what we call the canister round, which was like a big shotgun. And of course, the size of the pellets were a lot bigger. And after they fired 9 shots, there was no more movement.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I decided that I better have a plan first thing in the morning to go see what we killed.
Right.
How many wounded and what kind of intelligence we can get from them and so on. And so I went to the S3, and our colonel got a helicopter every day, and he was back in Pleiku at some meeting. So the XO was there. So I said to the XO and the S3, if I can get, a half an hour of flight time when that helicopter lands, I'd like to make a circle around that bamboo, and I'd move my scout platoon in 2 directions to converge sort of a double envelopment. And we surround that bamboo, and we get in there and see what the heck we got. So I got in the helicopter. I got my headset on, my heart's beating. And my first combat in Vietnam, 2 days into Vietnam. And we take off, and as we make the circle, I can see the bamboo, and right in the middle of the bamboo is a dead elephant.
Oh, jeez.
So my guys killed an elephant, and that wasn't the worst of it. The major laughed, and I called my troops back and had to come up with a plan of how do we get rid of that elephant?
Right.
Because it doesn't take long from the start to stink once you die in Vietnam. Anyway, I said, why don't we take our dozer tank and we'll dig a hole, and we don't have to dig it too deep, but we got to dig it pretty deep, at least 7 feet, 8 feet deep. And then we'll drag that elephant over to that hole, and with one of our tanks, we'll wrap a cable around its leg and drag it over, and we'll bury it. Good plan, right?
Right.
So we got the guys working everything. The hole is dug. We wrap a cable around the elephant's leg, and the tank starts pulling him towards the hole, and he pulls his leg off.
Oh, jeez.
So now I got a dead elephant with 3 legs, and one of his other legs, we put it in the hole. And lucky for me, on the way out to my location, I passed an engineer company, and it was commanded by one of my Citadel classmates.
Right.
So I went and borrowed a bucket loader from him, and we were able to maneuver the elephant into a position and buried him. And, you wouldn't even know there was an elephant buried in that bamboo. It was just a plain old piece of dirt. But
good story.
I kept getting harassed by all my fellow company commanders and other people about, hey, Kerr, tell us about your first killed in action. So I wore that until Tet. Tet was 2 weeks later, and that was a different story. Right. We weren't shooting elephants during Tet.
Yeah. What was the peacock story, which I know secondhand? What's the peacock story?
That happened when I left the tank battalion, became an infantryman, and was in charge of 300 Montagnards. And we were off on a mission to try to intercept this logistics group that was coming out of Cambodia with goods for the people that were fighting on the coast. Between the South Vietnamese and the U.S. Navy and Army, we pretty much sealed resupply by sea.
Mm-hmm.
So they were taking in munitions and food and medical equipment from Cambodia and stockpiling it in these different caches in the district that I was responsible for. So my job was really go find these caches and blow them up, or if they're too big, call in some close air support. And so we're on this mission, and I get a call that the guys in charge of this logistic operation were held up in this one little hooch, not too far from where I was. And would it be possible for me to take my guys and go and either capture them, which would be preferable, or wipe them out, you know? And so we had to crawl through a bunch of, grass and bamboo. And I was the lead guy. I didn't want anybody to make any mistakes. So I was the lead guy crawling through this stuff. And we got to the point where there was an open field and people had been growing hay and stuff for their animals. And that hay was only about 3 feet tall. And I could see the hooch that they had told me about, about 500 meters, 600 meters from the edge of that bamboo where we were. And as I'm getting organized, I made a move, and off to my right, there was this tremendous noise. Now, I've been a pheasant hunter, so, pheasants make a lot of noise when they take off. So do turkeys. Well, let me tell you, a peacock takes off, and it sounds like a B-52. And lo and behold, after the first one left, the second, the third, the fourth, there must have been 50 peacocks in the air. At one time, of course, this gave away our attack plan, and we never did get to that house because we woke everything up in the local area with that peacock attack. It was like the peacocks flew over the hooch. We couldn't get there and kill or capture anybody. So that was quite an exciting day.
Yeah. Okay, enough with the animals. Get back. You started to talk about the M48 was the basic tank that you had.
Yeah, M48A3, which meant that it had modified 3 times. And it had a 90 millimeter gun. It had a turret. Inside the turret, they had a like an M60 machine gun, but it didn't have all the extra stuff. It was a 7.62 machine gun that the gunner could fire. I had a 50 caliber up in my hooch, the turret. I had a 50 caliber, and then we had a 50 caliber externally mounted in the lotus hatch. Because if we weren't shooting main gun, we kept someone up in the back with that 50 caliber to make sure no one got behind us or someone wasn't sneaking up on us with what they called a B-40 rocket, which would not necessarily completely destroy a tank, but if it hit in the right place, it'd knock the track off, or if it hit inside where the ammo was, well, then it was a done deal. We were in trouble. Or
how hard was it to navigate that tank?
Well, we spent very little time off the roads in trails. I'd served in tanks in Germany, and I'd been in swamps and other kinds of crap. And swamps aren't friendly towards tanks or personnel carriers or the mortar carriers because they're heavy. They sink in the mud and all that crap. So our main tactic when I was in that tank battalion was we let the infantry find the enemy. They marked the spots where the infantry had found these guys, and then we'd come in with our tanks and just blow those places apart, at a mile away from where they were. And
so we spent time both in the M48 and what was the APC? That was the Armored Personnel Carrier?
Yeah, we had several types. They were basically what we called an M113. except the original ones were gasoline. We had diesel,
Right.
and diesel was much better because gasoline can start with a cigarette.
Right.
Diesel will blow up, but it needs some pretty hot and heavy assistance to start on fire.
Right.
And there was some jealous battalion commanders and brigade commanders in the 4th Infantry Division because many of them had the 113 that was gasoline,
Hmm.
and they lost a lot of soldiers because that was easy to blow up.
Right.
Where we had the diesel, and we were the only tank battalion in the division,
Mm.
and so we were in demand uh, when the enemy was, beating up on the infantry,
Right.
and so most of my time was supporting the infantry, and what they did, and I didn't like it, but because I had a complete scout platoon with 100 guys and 10 113 A1s, uh, I'd have to put them under the operational control of the first Cav, the 173rd, all these different units. And same with I had a 4.2-inch mortar platoon. I had 4 tracks and 4 mortars, and that was better than the weapon itself fired a uh, a mortar round that had a explosive diameter that was bigger than a 105
Hmm.
howitzer. And so the only difference was the mortars had a restricted range.
Hmm.
I'm saying that we could get out to maybe, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 kilometers, where
Right.
the 105 could shoot further than that.
Yeah.
And
I seem to remember, and again, I'm drawing from back. I was a kid. You told me a story about how you needed to respond to some where you thought the enemy was. You had to go through a whole chain of command to get authorization, including consultation with the local government. Does that ring a bell?
yeah, it was when I was an advisor, commander of these mountain yards, I couldn't go outside my fire base without me informing the province. We had a province team. Province is like a state.
Hmm.
And in the states, they had, in the provinces, they had districts,
Right.
just like we have counties in this. So if you think of New Jersey with all its different counties, uh, Vietnam had provinces, and in the provinces, they had districts. So one of my duties was to be also the division, the chief of Tuiman district, and that got to be kind of exciting. And uh, but we couldn't do any major operation, even an ambush, and we did an ambush every other night. And my team consisted of 5 people: me, a first lieutenant, and 3 sergeants. One was heavy weapons, one was light weapons, and one was medic. Well, the 3 sergeants were all black, all Afro Americans, good guys. And then my lieutenant was white and I was white. Well, you go on, you send at least 2 guys out on these ambushes so the mountain yards, stay focused on ambushing the bad guys and not having a party or something. And so we were busy, not necessarily during a day, but
Hmm.
that whole night we were up, trying to ambush these bad guys. Anyway, I had one of the black NCOs come to me, and he said that I was discriminating against him and the other black soldiers because almost every other night he was on ambush. And I said, well, let's see. We lost our lieutenant in a firefight a couple of weeks ago, and we haven't got a replacement.
Mhm.
So now we're down to four of us. So that means every other night you're on an ambush.
Right.
And so just divide, you know, the four of us by two,
Right.
and he, so he took that, high up the chain of command, and I had to go explain, how that system worked.
Right.
They were they were happy that I increased the ambushes and the missions, but you know, this was a this guy was scared all the time.
Yeah.
You know,
Coming up at the end of our time, so these questions are kind of interrelated here. So you told me in the I think it was the last tape that when you went to Vietnam, you went to basically stop Vietnam from falling to the communists. You had a very clear mission in mind. So my question has got two parts. What was your sense of how the war was going before you got there? And what was your sense of how the war was going when you went home from the first tour?
well, remember I was in Germany for 2 years,
Right,
getting ready to fight the Russians. So I wasn't focused on Vietnam.
right,
Uh, we didn't have TVs, we didn't have cell phones or tablets. So uh, my news was the weekly uh, Stars and Stripes, whatever they called it, and they'd have a little bit in there on Vietnam, but we didn't get much information on Vietnam.
mhm,
So when I got there, everything seemed pretty organized until I killed the elephant, and then you know I uh, I fell in with the battalion getting ready because they had some indication that there were a lot of North Vietnamese units moving around the southern part of Cambodia,
mhm.
which we weren't allowed to go into, which caused some problems. Uh, out there on the ground, there's no markers that say you are now
Right.
entering Cambodia or whatever.
So when you first got there, your sense was that it was pretty positive. War was going pretty well.
Yeah, and then Tet happened, and
Right.
we had been preparing for Tet. And like I said, during the Tet Offensive, I had one of my units up in Can Tho, which was by Dak To. I had one of my units at a place called Bambi Tuot. I had another one of my units off with the 2nd Brigade of the 4th Infantry Division. And so I'm sitting in this base camp, uh, and all my combat elements are off working for other people. So uh, it got better as time went on. Soon, I convinced the commander that I needed to have more infantrymen, and if they put under my control, operational control, an infantry company, uh, we could do some damage,
Right.
and so that started happening.
Right.
And
So
the infantry,
by the time you went home, by the time you left, after you were there roughly a year, a little bit more than a year, the first tour.
about a year,
Okay. When you were going home, what was your sense of how did your sense of how the war was going compare to what it was when you first went there?
completely different.
And was it
Remember, I was the last 4 months I was there. I was off with these Montagnards,
right?
and the province, Can Tho province, that's the Montagnard name, I think, Can Tho, had been all Montagnards.
Hmm.
And then when they divided South Vietnamese, South Vietnam and North Vietnam, the Vietnamese came in and took over that province.
Hmm.
And so the Montagnards that had been in charge were booted out, and all these South Vietnamese army people took over the running of that whole state,
Right.
which included the province and 3 districts.
Right.
And that was not taken very well by the Montagnards.
Right.
I don't have time to tell you the stories about that, but sometime I will. But so the advisors, in other words, my boss, was really a Vietnamese, a South Vietnamese soldier, and we had all these South Vietnamese soldiers that, that were in charge of supplies and training and all this stuff. And so once a month, my soldiers would get paid, and they'd get their rice ration.
Hmm.
And I had three different tribes of Montagnards with three languages. Uh, some were equivalent to E7s, and some were equivalent to PFCs, private first class. And so I go with them payday down to this big field that they had operating, where they were paying uh, all the people that worked in that whole province. So luckily my district was the closest to the province, so it wasn't a big deal to get there. But I'm there watching what's going on and watching my guys go through the pay line and the rice line and so on. And soon several of my guys come to me, and through my interpreter, I'm finding out that they're not getting their right ration or pay.
Right.
And the pay in the rice ration was based on the rank the guy had, plus how many kids did he have.
Right.
And so one of my Montagnards had 8 kids. I'm not sure how many wives he had, but he had 8 kids. And he got the equivalent, and he was like a specialist, an E4. So he was supposed to get so much pay because he was married, he had 8 kids, and so much money he would be allocated. And then he'd go to the rice place and he'd get a lot of rice for 8 kids.
Right.
But he didn't get his fair share.
Right.
So I go over to both places where they're doing this, and I find out it's the South Vietnamese army that's pilfering money and rice off these guys that are supposed to be getting paid.
Right. Is that kind of soured you a little bit in terms of how
Oh, it's soured me to the nth degree, because I went to high headquarters and I told them what the hell was going on.
Right.
And they said, oh, that happens every month.
Right.
And so I realized these are the guys who are fighting to help get this to run this country.
Right.
The South Vietnamese really looked down on the Montagnards.
Yeah.
And the Montagnards, once you got them trained, they were damn good fighters.
Yeah. Last question. I realize, we'll.
So when I left, I said, we got some challenges here.
Right. Right. What was I know you've told various stories of what it was like when you got home. When you came home from the first tour, what was your sense of how you were received when you came home from the first tour?
You mean when I landed in San Francisco?
I didn't know if that was the first tour or the second tour.
That was the first tour, and I was in uniform. I had khakis on. And people were throwing crap at me.
No, Jesus.
And here I just survived. I don't know how many close calls. I think I was blessed with about 9 guardian angels.
Right.
And my mother had many people that were praying for me. I don't know.
Yep, she had all of us praying for you.
She always said that she relied on my guardian angel. Well, I must have 7 or 8 guardian angels.
Yes.
So I was pissed off, with these people throwing stuff at me.
Right.
And so I hustled over and got on a 747 that landed at Kennedy.
Right.
And had time to call Susan and Pop. And Pop drove Susan to Kennedy. And I had a new baby that I hadn't even met. Amy was born while I was in August. Right. And I didn't get home until day before Christmas.
Yep, I remember that. Yep.
So Pop drove Susan to the airport, met me. That was so nice of him to do that. And then he gave the car to Susan and I, and he took the subway to the city.
Mm.
And came home, and we had to make sure he had a pickup when he got to the railroad station.
Right.
And so it wasn't a very pleasant arrival.
Yeah.
Okay. The soldiers, the soldiers obey orders and do what they're asked to do.
Right.
And, the older I got, the more questions I asked about what we were doing. But when you're a brand new captain, I mean, you're not asking a whole lot of questions when the colonel says you got to go here, or the general
Right.
says you got to go here. You go do your job.
Right.
And I
Okay.
focused on my soldiers, and that's the main reason I'm alive. They protected me,
Yeah.
and I tried to protect them.
Right.
But the South Vietnamese was corrupt,
Yeah.
as far as I
Okay.
was concerned.
All right. Listen, great talking to you. We'll schedule another one sometime next week. I got to take this call that's going to come in about 1 minute. So
Okay, Dan.
thanks so much. And I'll send this recording to you. I won't send it to anyone else.
Okay, so it'll come on email.
Yeah. Email and what you do is just click on the link and that'll take you right to the recording.
Okay, Dan.
All
God
right.
bless you.
God
Hope,
bless.
hope.
Take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.